Probably the biggest key to your quality of life, in fact, almost certainly the biggest key to your quality of life, is how much you can be true to yourself. William Shakespeare wrote, "To thine own self be true." And in the interview that David Hurd and I did on the topic of the keys to happiness, he said you have to be as true to yourself as you possibly can be. So here are 17 ways to be true to yourself. So the first key to being true to yourself starts with the mind, and it's about holding presence. And what that means is you recognize when you're in a state of mind, a state of consciousness where you're kind of at odds with yourself. You're feeling a bit funky, maybe there's some self-judgment going on, and this is the state we call fear consciousness. Prevents you from being in the state of love consciousness, which is self-acceptance. And so the first thing you can do is just get into the habit of noticing when you're feeling a bit off, and then metaphorically taking a step back, holding presence to what's going on and just observing. So rather than being in your thoughts, you just observe your thoughts, observe the moment, see what's going on, take a breath maybe, and see how you want to respond to the current moment and what's going on, and actually get conscious to what you really want to choose, how you want to respond to that situation rather than just unconsciously react to it. The second thing that comes after the mind is the body, and more particularly the gut. And there was a brilliant moment from Michael Jackson. You might have seen the Super Bowl halftime show that he did. If you haven't, and if you aren't into sport, it doesn't matter, you can find it on YouTube. The point I want to make to you is he did a presentation in it in which a false Michael appeared at 4 different corners of the stadium, and then the real one popped up through the floor, jumped up and stood perfectly still. And he then held that pose for over a minute without speaking, without singing, without moving at all. He just stood there for over a minute. And if you imagine if you're in that situation, how much would you have that temptation to think, well, there's a lot of people watching me, I've got to say something, I can't just stand here. So that would put quite a lot of pressure on the nerves, and in particular you may be aware of that time when you get butterflies and such like. So the key to what he did there to be able to hold presence was not just holding presence in the mind, but holding presence in the gut, so you can feel those the butterflies, feel however the body is reacting, but just allow that to be. So normally people are unfamiliar with that kind of experience, so they just sort of react to it and they think they have to go and do something to get rid of the feeling. But actually, if you can practice the art of just allowing that to be there, having no resistance to it whatsoever, then that's going to really allow you to be true to yourself at a whole other level, because that's going to become relevant in things like dating and relationships, where what's going on here, public speaking, possibly sports events or anything competitive, anything like that, where you're feeling the butterflies come up. They don't need to be anything you're afraid of. You can just allow them to be there, and with practice you can just allow them to just be there. Tip number 3 is to practice the boundaries exercise. This is something that I did in a seminar once. You can see here with Fiona Cutts helping me present this class. So we did a boundaries exercise. What happens is you get people, usually in pairs. One person gives the signal, so this is don't come any closer, and then hands down by the side is you're welcome to come closer. So that person stands still, and then the other person can respond to that. If they want to, they can move towards, or if they're happy just being where they are, they can stay where they are. So if you find someone you can practice that with, a friend or a partner or whatever, then practicing that is going to give you a good grounding in being able to tune into yourself, to what's true for you, for when you're happy for people to come closer, or when you're not, and it will really build up your strength in your boundaries. Tip 4 is to take that experience and ability that you learn from doing the boundaries exercise into all of life. So not just when you're standing in front of someone, they're coming closer and such like, but you actually can learn to practice your yeses and your nos. So when you want to say yes and when you want to say no to people, that by doing the boundaries exercise, that's going to start you thinking about your boundaries in other situations. Even simple things like someone offers you a cup of tea and maybe say no, or you say no to some sweets, and then because they want you to do it too, they kind of nudge you, go on, have some sweets, whatever it is. So saying yes and saying no is a great thing you can practice, and you can find that you can be true to yourself by saying no when you want to, just as much as you can by saying yes. And then at the same token, you can also practice your yeses. There will be things that you do want to say yes to that perhaps in the past you haven't allowed yourself to, so you can get some mileage out of those as well. Tip number 5, be aware of people who use imperative grammar, and in particularly you can get used to, what I do is I have kind of a radar that goes off, so whenever people are using that, and by the way, I'll tell you what imperative grammar is, that might help. So when people are telling you what to do, so if they're saying things like hurry up, wear that red dress, don't do that, all kinds of things that people are giving you instruction, drive more slowly, anything they could be telling you. Whenever you're using that, whenever you hear that specific aspect of grammar of the English language, then rather than them talking to you generally, they're in a specific moment where they're looking to control what you're going to do. Now, it might be quite innocent, and there might be a degree to which you don't want to be too harsh and let some things go. If you do think they're innocent, they're not a problem. But a lot of the times there can be a very subtle degree of control coming in from other people. Sometimes they don't even know it, they're not particularly aware of it. Other times there's a lot of intentional control, and we're coming into topics like coercive control. But the ability to pick up imperative grammar just like that whenever you hear it, so that it immediately becomes something in your attention you can make a choice with. That person's using imperative grammar with me. Do I want to let them dictate to me what I'm going to be doing, or is this a moment where I genuinely need to think, well, actually, I will decline buying into what they're trying to do? So that can be invaluable. And if you practice it for a few weeks and months, eventually you'll get to a point you'll notice it so easily, and it'll make your life a lot easier around those kinds of people. Tip 6, in a similar vein, look out for people using the conditional tense of the English language. So that's shoulda, woulda, coulda. People telling you what you should have done and could have done. You would have. I would have done that, so you did it wrong. The alternative as well is the negative. So what you shouldn't do. So these are, again, the people are looking to. Often they're looking to impose their judgmentalism on you. And if they're people that have been quite close to you in your life, these might be where you have picked up the habit of not being true to yourself, because you're always looking to please them, to appease them, to gain their approval. And so looking out, having that radar for the conditional tense, shoulda, woulda, coulda, and the negatives can also be a great way to pick up when people are maybe trying to constrict your ability to be true to yourself. Tip number 7 is about the conventional level of society. And you have the option, the choice, as to whether you want to decline the conventional level of society. So this is the rules and roles that society uses. A lot of them are common sense, like in England we drive on the left-hand side of the road. In America you drive on the right-hand side of the road. That makes sense, so there aren't any crashes. But there are a lot of things that are basically social convention, which aren't necessarily going to align with you being true to yourself. Let's say that one convention is that you eat 3 meals a day. Well, you might find that if you listen to your body and what it needs, sometimes it doesn't need that. It might need more food. It might need less food. It might want to fast for a few hours, all kinds of things. And that's just one example. We're talking about the whole spectrum of social convention here. Now, a lot of people would think they would have a worldview that you shouldn't be going beyond social convention. But it is actually only an option. It's just there. You can transcend it and see which parts work for you and decline the parts that don't. So then that's going to open up 100% of your ability to be true to yourself that way. Tip number 8 is to listen to your body. This is something that David Hurd taught me back in 2002. He's a trainer of elite international athletes. He also founded the National Rehabilitation Centre for the Paralysed. And what he does with both those populations and also with ordinary people is to get them to listen to their body, to tune into what's going on, kind of like a car mechanic would pay attention to the car engine. You're getting a feel for what's going on and learning to read the runes of your own body, and particularly because the body kind of equates to the subconscious mind as well. So it's a great wealth of information if you can tune into it. First of all, for the gross level experience of your physical body, things like general health, but also if something is feeling a bit off to you and you can perhaps feel it in your body, you don't feel quite right. So 2 great reasons to listen to your body. And the 9th tip, which is a follow-on to that previous one about listening to the body, is something that Don Miguel Ruiz said. He's distinguishing between the needs of the mind and the needs of the body. So the needs of the mind are not the needs of the body. If you have a need for something like food, if it's in the mind, then you can never satisfy the need. So you need to separate out, these are the needs of the mind and these are the needs of the body. And that's going to be great for you being true to yourself, because you're going to be able to resist those moments when the mind hijacks what the body wants, and you're going to be able to respond more fully to what's actually going to make you feel good, rather than just be a concept in your head that actually doesn't really. Another great way to be true to yourself is by understanding a kissing consciousness concept that I call unconscious positives, or unconscious so-called positives. So these are things in our society that we consider to be good things always, but might not necessarily be what you want to do in a given moment. So if you take things like birthdays and Christmas, you might have people saying, oh, it's great to take your birthday off work, so not go in, or whatever you might want to do, or rather whatever people would expect you to do on your birthday. So that would be an unconscious positive, as in it's not really a positive, it's an unconscious reaction to a belief system. If it's actually better for you to do something else, maybe it's in your best interest to work on that day. Another thing might be Christmas. There's a concept that seeing certain people is going to be a positive thing, and various traditions as well, things that you might be expected to do, and they're all positive things. You might actually think, I don't want to do that at all. That's not a choice for me. So it's just perceived as being positive by society, but if you don't enjoy it, it's actually negative. You can recognize that and decide that you want to do the alternative that you would rather do. The other side of that coin of the unconscious positives is conscious negatives. So it's exactly the same thing the other way around. So there are lots of things that society now is just big. I'll give you an example. Society is getting so fixed in the idea of being comfortable that actually there's now a movement where a lot of people are suggesting, why don't we do things that make us maybe a little bit more uncomfortable? Maybe we do more exercise, even if we are better off not doing. Maybe we have a cold shower because it's more of a challenge rather than getting too comfortable in our lives. And that's just an example. The concept of conscious negatives can be anything, where, maybe a negative around being lazy. Maybe it's going to be good for you to be lazy in a moment. Maybe it's not actually laziness. And take something like hard work. You could see that as a negative as well. Sometimes it's a positive, sometimes it's a negative. So people would say, well, you don't want to be working too hard because that's a negative. Well, maybe it's a moment where you do want to work hard. Maybe it's really, maybe it's going to be your true choice to work really hard for a really long period of time. And you might, of course, want to, at some point, consider taking a break. But the point is that these positives and the negatives are just so-called because they're just concepts of ideas of what equates to positive and negative. But it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be any reality to it. And another way that we can understand those two concepts is when other people are particularly trying to push something on you. So conscious negatives become judgmental negatives, and unconscious positives become judgmental positives. So somebody's maybe pushing a judgment of loyalty onto you, and they're saying, loyalty is a good thing, so that's a positive. But maybe it's loyalty to the family business. You don't want to go into that. So it's just another way of them controlling and being judgmental of you. So you can look out for that as well. Tip number 12 is going to help with all of that, and it's about developing your true conscience. So we all have a conscience. One of the problems that can be with that is that we get conditioned into developing a false sense of self and a false sense of conscience. So our true ideas of right and wrong and what's right and wrong for us to be doing can be hijacked by other people, and the wiring, the programming can be unhelpful. So it can help to realize that we can actually reclaim our true conscience. And that really comes down to deciding what's really true for you. Some of it is going to be, all of it is going to be aligning with truth and reality. So you've got the objective reality out there, you can align pretty easily with that. And then you've got the subjective reality, what's true for you. And it might be different to what people have been taught. So we know this because people often have a resistance. The idea of the conscience seems like a bad thing. But actually the conscience, the etymology of it is conscience, meaning with knowing. So it's just your own knowing of what's true for you. So your conscience, if you look at it that way, ought really be a tool that's helping you 100% to be true to yourself. The next tip is about what I call the willingness to be unpopular, or the willingness to be vulnerable in a non-physical sense. And we don't necessarily want to be vulnerable in a physical sense. If somebody lets the tiger out at the zoo, that's not a good physical way of being vulnerable. When we talk about vulnerability, we're talking about social vulnerability rather than a physical threat. So I don't know, maybe you write a poem and you read it to your friends, and it's vulnerable because they might think it's rubbish, they might even say so, but often it's an irrational fear that we have of expressing who we are. So if you have a willingness to be vulnerable in that sense, then you can be true to yourself in ways that other people can't if they're not willing to be vulnerable in that sense. And that might even also mean being unpopular, as long as it's physically safe to do so. If you've got a truth that's other people are going to find unpopular, then you have a choice to make. You can either be true to yourself and be willing to be unpopular, or you can not be true to yourself and just repress it. And so I'm going to cover 3 of these willingness concepts here, 2 more. And the essence of it is that you might choose to do something that you don't necessarily like or that you don't necessarily enjoy because it constitutes being true to yourself. Regardless of those factors, you understand that it's in your best interests. So it's something that you're going to do anyway. So number 14 is the willingness to be bored. Same principle. So nobody wakes up thinking that they want to be bored, but actually, if you have a willingness to be bored rather than having that outright resistance to it, then it's going to help open up another world of ways in which you can be true to yourself. Maybe people eat because they're avoiding boredom. So it's just comfort eating or boredom eating or anything like that. Maybe study is boring, but maybe it's going to get you where you want to go. And actually, maybe if you get into it, you find out you do want to be doing it and you can be more comfortable with the choice that you're making. So willingness to be bored is a brilliant one that will get you places. And finally, another one along that similar vein is the willingness to be uncertain or even aimless. Often we have in our society a situation where people are so resistant to anything. They need to be sure, even at the point of they'd rather make a wrong decision and be sure than do destructive things, so at least they're sure they know where they are. They've got some certainty in their lives. But actually, if you hold presence to this, you can recognize that uncertainty, even aimlessness, doesn't have to be something you have to fear or have resistance to. And actually, I call aimlessness the waiting room of the true self, because if you allow it to be there, rather than going back into your old habits and the old things that you don't want to do, if you allow that aimlessness to be there, then it can find its own way eventually into whatever it is that you want to be doing that you haven't been doing before. So it can actually be a really beneficial thing to have willingness around. Tip number 16 is to always express your potential, regardless of how you think it should or shouldn't be done. Oftentimes we think there's something that we'd like to do, but we perhaps don't do it because we think it's something that people should be making money at. And if you can do it, why not just do it and then think about whether it makes money later? At least that way you're getting it out of yourself. And Dr. Robert Holden said, unhappiness comes from sitting on the gifts that we have. So it might be the case that always it's going to be better for you to express the potential that you have and then look at other things later, rather than think, well, I can't express that potential, I have to sit on this ability for XYZ reasons that might be just stopping you from enjoying having that ability. And then finally, tip 17 is make your own circumstances. George Bernard Shaw said, I don't believe in circumstances. The people that get on in life are the people that find their own circumstances for whatever it is they want to do. And if they can't find them, they make them. So when it comes to jobs and employment and that kind of thing, there are two ways that you can approach that. The first is to see what jobs are out there and then take whichever one best suits your abilities. The other way is to do it the other way around, is to say, what are your abilities? What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? What's going to be the most productive use of your time? And then find ways to make that what you do, whether it's your career, vocation, whatever. Find a way so that then whatever you do fits in with that, doing it that way round, rather than just finding out what the options are and squeezing yourself, constricting yourself into other ways of being which aren't necessarily going to use your talents the most effective way. And they're certainly not going to use all of them. So it might be a better thing that you can do it the other way around, to say, what do I want to do? How do I want to use my talents? And how can I find or create a situation, environment in which I can use those talents to the full? And I want to give you a bonus tip, which is I kind of touched on this earlier, and that's to distinguish between fear and fear consciousness. So in Kissing Consciousness, we have the terms love consciousness and fear consciousness. And the fear consciousness is not really associated with a physical threat as such. So it can be very useful to distinguish between social fears and things where there's not actually a physical risk to you, but you're just feeling a bit shy, or you just have repressed your abilities, so it's going to take a bit of time to get them going. There's a difference between those and the physical fears, because the physical fears are very rational. We want to be afraid of big animals, people with knives, guns, abusive people, all kinds of things. That kind of fear, even a mental threat with things like the internet and such like. So that can be a dangerous place too. So we want to make a distinction between those fears and the fear consciousness. So the first fear is the physical fears and the actual threat. That's very healthy and natural for them to arise if the circumstances dictate that it's a relevant thing. The fear consciousness is always something that we want to be getting rid of if we can. So if you can tell the difference between the two, then when it comes to diving into your vulnerability, the first question you can ask yourself is, well, let me read the room. What kind of environment am I in? Is it merely a fear consciousness issue because I'm in a safe space that people are going to allow me to be who I am, or is it genuinely a physical threat situation? So if you can learn to make a distinction between those two, you're going to find it very easy to be true to yourself in that way. So let's recap. 1. Hold presence to your mind so that you can choose consciously and respond rather than react. 2. Hold presence to your gut. 3. Practice the boundaries exercise. 4. Practice your yeses and your nos. 5. Look out for imperative grammar. 6. Look out for the conditional tense. 7. Transcend and include the conventional level of society. 8. Listen to your body. 9. Learn the difference between the needs of the mind and the needs of the body. 10. Unconscious so-called positives. 11. Conscious so-called negatives. 12. Develop your true conscience. 13. Willingness to be unpopular or non-physically vulnerable. 14. willingness to be bored. 15, willingness to be unsure or aimless. 16, express your potential. And 17, make your own circumstances. I hope that was helpful for you. If it was, I'd love to hear your comments or even questions in the comments section below. And particularly if there's one of those that helped you with a particular situation and there's a story around that, then please do tell me. I'd love to hear how you've been able to apply these ideas to your own life. And something that might help you further is my free guide, Top 10 Life Skills for an Amazing Life. You can get that for free, as I say, at kissingconsciousness.com/top 10. Here's the link in the description below. And that's going to expand on and cover a lot of the topics that I've talked about today, such as the boundaries integration, listening to the body, and various other things like that. It's really going to complement what we've done today in a great way. The material also is covered, of course, in the Kissing Consciousness Handbook. If you'd like to get a copy of that, you can get that via links at kissingconsciousness.com/book. And there's a Kindle version available as well, kissingconsciousness.com/Kindle. And also, if you'd like some help on a one-to-one basis, you'd like to work with me personally, then you can do that. You can go to kissingconsciousness.com/coaching. We can arrange a free 15-minute discovery call, have a chat, and see if it is something that I can help you with. So maybe it is. Good luck with all those tips. I'll see you again.